Hello, friends and family from Life's Journey United Church of Christ. This is Pastor Micah talking to you here on this Wednesday evening. I have some pretty exciting news to share with all of you, but since I know for some people it will be exciting and for others it might create anxiety, I wanted to share this personal video just letting you know a little bit about the changes that are going on at Life's Journey and also some of the reasons why. We have some upcoming changes at Life's Journey right now related to our church's COVID recommendations. As those of you who have been with our church the last few years have known, we have been really careful throughout the pandemic to listen to what health experts say. So we each can do our part to further the healing ministry of the church and also to look out for those in our community most at risk. And I'm very proud of the work we've done around this. The highest health authority we have is the CDC, or the Center for Disease Control. So since most of our leaders here at Life's Journey are not medical experts, I sure am not. We have looked to the CDC's guidance to help guide us in the choices we are making about what we ask of each other when we gather at the church. This is the approach I use as a chaplain. Most of you know I'm a hospice chaplain of many years. Not being a doctor or a nurse myself, I look to the doctors and nurses on my hospice team to tell me how to prepare myself to visit people who are sick with different conditions. They let me know if someone has tuberculosis or is otherwise immunocompromised, for instance, what to wear to keep me and them safe. And I don't want to get tuberculosis, and I don't want to spread the flu or disease to someone. So I do what they ask. Because of this, when health experts asked us as churches to pause in person gatherings and meet online at the beginning of the pandemic, here at Life's Journey, we did so. And then, when the CDC said last summer they thought it was safe to lift masking requirements then, last summer, we made masks optional because that's what the health experts said. And then, when the Delta variant hit us and the CDC pulled this back and recommended masking again, we ask everyone to please mask again in worship, even though many in our community were not masking. And even though some of us, if we're honest at church, we might not have masked everywhere, at church we did that because that's what the CDC said was recommended. This week, our council met, and our council is our elected group of church leaders to discuss if we would continue to use these CDC guidelines that we have been using throughout the pandemic to determine what was safe. And if so, how? Now, it might sound weird that we asked this, but the reason why is because of changes in the guidance the CDC was giving us that have gone on that meant that we no longer were lining up in our recommendations with what the CDC said. Since the COVID surge in December and January began to die out, near the end of January and early February, the CDC set up a new measurement that we weren't using called community levels to assess when certain COVID restrictions are medically necessary and not. And they created a handy tool that I'm going to share the link for in an email to the church. And if you watch this video or Facebook, but you don't see that link, get in touch with me. I'll share it. And this handy link and tool online allows you to look up where we are in our county about COVID community levels. For communities with a high community level, it is recommended as medically necessary that all people, vaccinated or not vaccinated, mask. And people use increased social distancing measures, even sometimes limiting group activities indoors. This is what we've been doing already. But with medium or moderate community levels of COVID, these measures are now listed by the CDC as not medically necessary for people who are not at risk when they are in a situation that is not a high risk situation. But in a moderate COVID community level, people at high risk of disease are recommended to mask, as are those who are unvaccinated. For a low community level, um, there are not people the CDC is recommending to engage in masking and social distancing as a medically necessary activity if you're in a situation that is not high risk. But um, but in all of these levels of community COVID spread, high, middle, and low, the CDC says if people individually feel comfortable masking, it's not anything medically dangerous. So we don't want to discourage people when they continue to mask and social distance at any point. What does all this mean for us? Well, when this tool was released in late February, we were still in line with the CDC recommendation because in late February, we were listed as having high community COVID levels in Alamance County. And that fit the guidelines we were using, asking everyone who joined us indoors to mask and social distance. But things have changed. Our COVID numbers have improved, as has our vaccination level as a county. And based on our current COVID community levels, the CDC lists us as at a medium or moderate community level. And in that level, they say that general masking, asking everyone to mask indoors, is not medically indicated. Although at risk people and unvaccinated people are encouraged to mask still. And um, everyone in a high risk environment. Now, what's a high risk environment? Um, when I go to hospice and I work with medically fragile people, that is high risk. I still have to wear all of my PPE every day, even if it's exhausting. And if you go visit someone in a hospice, you'll probably have to wear some PPE too. Also, when I took my dad into a crowded stadium to watch NC State lose to UNC, go Hills. Guess what? That was crowded, full of people. That's a high risk situation, even though it wasn't required necessarily. The CDC says it is medically indicated to wear a mask. When Paula and I went a few weeks ago to a very full theater to watch a play, it was medically indicated there. Here's the thing with this: none of these situations are at all like our church services at Life's Journey. We're a small church with a lot of room to social distance. Almost everybody at the church is vaccinated. So that is not what the CDC right now is calling a high risk situation. There's tons of room to social distance for those who prefer to do so in worship. Because of this, our current guidelines as of today are much, much stricter than the CDC says is medically necessary unless our COVID rates get higher. Because we have a higher rate of immunity through vaccination and through people who've recovered from COVID. And COVID spread is lower. So, yesterday, Tuesday night calls, because we're being more strict than the Center for Disease Control says we need to be, to discuss whether to follow the current CDC guidelines and thus change what we're doing, or whether to be more strict, or whether to change it but give a little time. In lining up with the CDC guidelines in our context would be lifting some of these recommendations. Now, in our meeting, some of us expressed being pretty nervous about this because some of us are at risk or we have family members that are at risk. Some of us, including me, are nervous for another reason. The science makes sense, but we're kind of nervous that what if there's a variant? What if there's a surge? And what if we have to ask everybody to wear masks again to line up with the CDC? Others are pretty excited about this idea because they've noticed, those who are excited, that our church has been a lot more strict than many of the businesses in our community. And some of us are really happy as leaders to have some of our visitors feel more comfortable. Because having different standards in our church than's going on in the community is really confusing, and especially if the CDC is not asking us to. Where we all landed, trying to find a way ahead that respected everyone's feelings, and was to we decided that whatever we each feel, none of us are doctors or health experts. And so we've decided to set a plan to, in a few weeks, begin to follow the guidance the CDC is currently giving. And part of the reason for this is whether we're nervous about masking, wearing a mask, whether we're nervous about not wearing a mask. All of us have seen the danger that comes when people don't listen to medical advice. I've got people in my own uh, close family, so to speak, who opted to have a horse dewormer rather than get vaccinated and got really sick from it. And some of you know people like that. That's what happens when we don't listen to doctors. And so we're going to listen to what the doctors, what the CDC are saying and go along. And so we're going to cautiously move back in step with the CDC guidelines. We don't want to do it all at once. We've moved from Zoom back to in-person worship, and we don't want anybody to have shock. So what we're going to do, we're not going to make any big chances. This changes this week or next week. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to still ask everyone to mask and worship. But we plan to move in line with these CDC recommendations beginning in April. Starting in April, we will have masking be optional. And we'll also encourage our ministries to feel comfortable doing indoor events like meals, like receptions, like coffee hour, and other events we have limited in the past during high COVID levels. Since at our COVID level, it is recommended that if you are at a high risk for getting sick, or if you are unvaccinated, you should wear a mask. I want to encourage you to talk to your doctor about your own risk factors. If you may be at risk, and some of you already know you're at risk to respiratory infections, that you get pneumonia or bronchitis all the time, but if you're at risk, and we're going to ask you to follow their advice. If so, now I'm saying follow their advice because it's not my place to ask you what your health situation is and to police that. That's between you and your doctor. We will also watch our community levels. The CDC guidelines are pretty clear. If we return to high levels to follow CDC guidance, if we get to high levels of community spread, we'll probably have to resume masking and social distancing. My hope is that this does not happen. But that was my hope last year too. I bet it was yours. And we learned over the last year to temper our optimism with being watchful and careful. Now, if as I hope, and I'm sure you don't, but begin to have a low level of community spread, we're also going to let the church know as leaders. Although that won't really require any changes in our COVID recommendations to the church because masks will remain optional. But what will change if we're at a lower level of spread is that will indicate that things are even safer. So many who are at risk right now or who know they are unvaccinated Under that situation, you'll know that according to the CDC, at a very low level of spread, it's fairly safe for you too to do everything in the same way as in everyone else. Again, we're not going to have major changes the next two Sundays, the next two Sundays in March. The only change you will see the next few Sundays is that when I preach, I will not be wearing a mask when I'm in the pulpit. But I'm going to remask when I sit back down with the church, and I'm going to remask when I'm interacting with children at children's church, if any of them come forward, um, and when I mix with the church during fellowship time. Now, that's a pretty standard practice in most churches that practice masking. But I have been stricter because I wanted to model masking when it was medically necessary to normalize it. And now I want to model that it's okay to make personal choices according to the CDC. Now, when April happens, this might be a big culture shock for us as a church. I want to encourage everyone to be sensitive. We will continue to provide masks and encourage people who might feel sick to either stay home or wear a mask, and anyone who feels comfortable masking to do so. And I would encourage those of you who won't be regularly masking, and I know some of you are those, to be sensitive to those who do. You know, it has become normal during COVID for huggy people like me. I'm very huggy. I like my mother out to hug everybody. But it has become very normal for huggy people like me not to jump up at the first person I see and hug them, but to say, how do you feel about hugs or handshakes? What's your comfort level? And then to respect that. And I think that may be a safe way to show respect to each other. It might be that if you're not masking all the time, you might have a mask with you. And if you go up to somebody and they say, and then you ask them, are you comfortable with me being unmasked? If they say, yeah, go ahead. But if they say no, respect that and either keep your distance or put a mask on. Um, and usually it's going to be pretty easy to tell because guess what? People who might prefer masking are probably going to wear what? A mask. So it's not rocket science, but it's a way of being respectful and polite to most people. In my own case, at least when we begin in April, I'm going to put a mask on when I'm not in the pulpit and when I'm near other people. If I approach a group and everyone says, Pastor, I'm okay with you having your mask off around us while we talk. If I feel comfortable in that moment, I'll take off the mask. But otherwise, I'm going to wear it because I feel like it's the onus on me as a non immunocompromised person to show maximum respect to you. And honestly, I don't want anyone to be put in a situation that they have feel pressure to tell me or anyone else why they feel like they need to wear a mask. Because your health concerns are personal, and I want that respect. For me, I'll tell you this as pastor and as someone who works in healthcare, I am cautiously optimistic. All of these features that have been a regular part of our life masking, social distancing, meeting virtually at times I mean, they become key to my work and probably many of your work outside of church. These have all prevented disease and saved lives. I always think if we hadn't done these measures when required, imagine how much worse all of this would have been. They were important when medically necessary. But yet, even in the hospice, when I work as a hospice chaplain, and even when I work in the hospital as a hospital chaplain, masking and social distancing and gloving are not standard practices when there's not an emergency for most people, just high risk people in high risk situations. So when health experts like the CDC are suggesting we move away from this. They're saying we are moving beyond an emergency phase where we need to have an emergency approach to COVID. And even though that may make some of us somewhat nervous, and I have to be honest, it makes me a bit nervous. I have to wear. So it feels weird that it's a personal choice now, um, to not wear it, according to CDC. But even though it might make you nervous, it might not, but it might make you nervous. I want you to hear this. If they're saying we don't have to act like we're in an emergency situation, it is a positive sign. It's always been a positive sign in hospice and in hospital. When the doctor says you don't need as many precautions, it means that things are improving, even if we're not out of the woods. And that's good news. It's good news. In the Bible, we hear this. Psalm 30 says, anger lasts only for a short time, but favor is for life. Crying may last for a night, but joy comes with a new day. And Ecclesiastes 3 tells us, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones, a time to gather them up, a time to embrace and a time to turn away. There's social distancing or not there, isn't there? A time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to keep, excuse me, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. This suggests there is a time to be in emergency mode and a time to begin to open up and move beyond emergency thinking. Emergencies cannot last forever. Eventually, a new normal forms. Not being a medical authority, I don't have the authority to determine when that is. And I have to listen to those who are authorities when they say emergency action is needed, and also when they say emergency actions are not. And that's essentially where we've landed as leaders. My hope is for all my fear and anxiety about this personally, and for all yours, because some of us are worried. We've been through this before. My hope is that they're right, and that we are moving into a time of opening up, a time when we can leave emergency reactions aside and feel more free. And so, in this moment, I choose hope and optimism. And I invite you to do the same. You can find that space. I look forward to seeing each of you this Sunday. We have our 9:30 a.m. Lenten study on meditation. And I invite you, I'm excited to see you in worship at 10:30 a.m. And so I'm talking about looking forward to seeing you masked and in person, but we will continue to offer Facebook Live for those who wish it. Look forward to seeing you soon. God bless you.